A Bit Lit, celebrating research and creativity of all kinds.
Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Ronan Hatfull. I am an assistant tutor in the Department of Theatre and Performance Studies at the University of Warwick, and I am delighted this afternoon to be joined by two of the most exciting improvisers of Shakespeare in the United Kingdom, Rebecca Macmillan and Tom Wilkinson. Rebecca and Tom, would you care to introduce yourselves?
Yes, hello, I'm Rebecca Macmillan, and I'm an improviser, so I've been improvising since 2003 or something like that, a long time ago, teaching and performing improv in the UK and beyond with various companies, including Impromptu Shakespeare, which basically was founded in 2013 and has been performing since then in the UK at fringe festivals and Shakespeare festivals and rural touring and various other performances, and we try to create a 50-minute to hour-long new improvised Shakespeare play. That's what we do.
Exactly, and I'm Tom Wilkinson, not that one. I'm another member of the company that's been there since the beginning, currently a guest performer with them, but still very much involved. And yes, around the edges of that, also improvise and other things, and as Rebecca does, interested in the kind of the academic side of improvising Shakespeare and what it can tell us about the plays that maybe textual study or other forms of investigation can't yet do.
Thank you both. So I wanted to ask start with kind of a pretty broad question about what for each of you constitutes a Shakespearean improvisation, and maybe there's also the opportunity here for you to talk about the company's formation and how and when you got together. But kind of maybe using that as the starting point, what constitutes improvisation for you?
So Shakespearean improvisation, specifically, I suppose you're keeping two plates spinning, one of trying to create good improvisation theatre / comedy, however you want to see it, and in the other hand you're spinning the plate of channeling our the language, I suppose, the beat or the feeling, the themes, genre, character types, tropes, locations, props, everything that feel like very much they come directly from Shakespeare or from the kind of cultural text of Shakespeare. So portrayals, famous portrayals or performances of Shakespeare's plays, and that's going in the other hand. So we're spinning these sort of two plates at once, I suppose. That's what it feels like anyway. Tom, have you got any more thoughts on that?
No, I think I totally agree with Rebecca's kind of maximalism. It's Shakespeare and the interpretation of Shakespeare and everything stacked on top. I mean, at a minimal level, I guess Shakespearean improvisation can be an actor that's forgetting their lines and then nubbing to cover till the next line they remember. But yeah, on top of that, we're also doing theme. On top of that, we're also doing plot. And yeah, everything that kind of sits around Shakespearean performance of the last few hundred years in an hour with mixed results.
And how did you get together as a company?
So in 2013, Rob Wilson, he went to America, to Chicago, and saw the Improvised Shakespeare Company and was completely blown away by it, inspired by it, and decided that he wanted to create that here in the UK. Meanwhile, there were a bunch of people thinking about improvising Shakespeare, or actually already kind of doing that in different companies in the UK. And so Rob did auditions originally for a fringe run in 2013, and that's when the original core kind of cast got together. And then we did that first Edinburgh, and then Rob Wilson, he's one of those sort of people who has lots of different fingers in different pies, and so like one of his other pies took off in a big way, so he went off to do some other things, and but those of us who've been in the show really wanted to keep going, and so we kept going, and have been performing together ever since. We went back up to the Fringe in 2015 in Edinburgh, and yes, have been going ever since, and have taken on two or three times we've had new intake come in, and expanded the company and slightly developed our show. And yeah, so that's how we got together in our little journey, I suppose. Have I missed stuff out, Tom? I'm sure I have.
No, not at all. I think that's definitely the story I remember. I think it's really interesting that way that it started. It was someone bringing together people that didn't necessarily know and forming a company out of it. It wasn't a group of improvisers who worked together that decided to do a thing. It was people with a wide range of ages and backgrounds and improvising styles that found themselves in a room together. And I think kind of a strength and a challenge of the group ever since, compared with some of the others that do the same thing, is that, you know, we're speaking many different languages in addition to Elizabethan English.
That takes me really nicely to the next question, which was, it'd be great to talk about kind of the practice of making up Shakespearean language. And when you succeed, how does that feel on stage? How does it make you feel as performers?
Tom, you go first on this one. Switch it up.
I think it's different from what you might imagine, and I think it's a little bit different from what short form performers might do. So I think people often think about, it's dropping in, archaic sort of verb forms or something like that, or references to kind of literature at the time. You know, so there's lots of vowels and these and that kind of stuff, and forsooths, which do still creep in. But I think as people do it more, I think it's more that kind of that metrical pulse that kind of underpins it and becomes the heartbeat of what people are saying. And speaking for myself, and it'd be interesting to hear how Rebecca approaches it. Like I can sort of find myself seeing the kind of the lines coming to an end and realizing I've got, two syllables to play with, and then it's the next line, or there's a couplet coming up or something like that. It's like doing Dance Revolution or something like that on a game. There's things coming up and you've got to hit them. And just like with musical improvisation or something like that, because you're concentrating on that, you're not maybe thinking about some of the other things, what's coming out of your mouth or what you're doing. And that's where surprises come, and that's the most exciting thing, because once you've come to the end of a soliloquy, say, you said something you weren't ready for, and then everyone else on stage is looking at you going, what? And then you justify that, and then that's how you make your drama.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think if that's almost like the micro, to sort of put the focus on the macro, the overall story arc, I think is another thing that so it's one thing to do an improvised long form narrative, and it's another where you have no constrictions. You can kind of go wherever you want, or you're following a story spine or whatever. But with Shakespeare, we don't know at the beginning sort of which genre this is going to feel like, although there are tendencies that we tend to play towards, I would say, and we don't want them, each performance, especially in something like a Fringe run, we don't want them to feel the same. So it's sort of there's this overall kind of hovering eye that I feel like I have to have for the kind of shape of the piece and the motivations of the characters, and when there needs to be a new character come in, because it feels like this is where in Shakespeare the brother, the long lost brother, would turn up after 20 years or whatever it is. Yes, that feels quite unique to this particular kind of performance.
Are there any themes or settings or kind of character archetypes or tropes that work kind of most effectively for you in Impromptu Shakespeare? Because you were talking there, Rebecca, about being aware of that kind of the necessity for this wider structure, which I guess is a key part of what you're doing, as well as the improvisation of the kind of linguistic forms, which I'd like to talk about more later. But yeah, and kind of the mechanics of that But at the moment, what are those kind of, what do you find that the company keeps coming back to in terms of those key ingredients kind of from a Shakespearean toolbox?
I think so there's two answers to that. One is that there are natural tendencies that we have as people from the 20/21st century that we need to almost like that we can tend towards, that we have to train ourselves out of doing, which is quite interesting. So for example, kind of the working class person who ends up being the king, which is not something that you would find in Shakespeare. It doesn't feel true to Shakespeare. We have to kind of like try and train it. There are tendencies that we have because they exist in our our sort of culture at the moment, in the literature and the TV and whatever of our culture, that if we're not careful, those things will naturally express themselves because we're so immersed in them. And so we have to train ourselves out of doing those. But in terms of things that are most successful for us, I think people really like to see characters. They want to care about characters, and they want to see them fall in love or overcome adversity or have a moment of crisis and then everybody dies. So I would say that those are the things that we get the most response from the audience about, and it's so easy then to play to that. As improvisers, it's a symbiotic relationship with the audience, and we're very much working off the energy that we're getting back from them. And so I would say there are fewer history plays in our repertoire, and when we do a tragedy, there will be parodic elements in it. And elements of light. I mean, Shakespeare's tragedies have elements of light relief anyway, but I think that we will veer further towards parody with something that feels like it's more tragic than we would towards when it's like something like a comedy or a problem play feeling type thing. Although having said that, we do really pride ourselves when we have moments of genuine pathos and tenderness that are not undercut by parody. So we don't aim for parody, if that's fair to say.
Is that kind of to do with, maybe ask Tom this as well, but is that to do with kind of the fact that when you're improvising within a tragic structure, because there is a comic imperative, or your audience is seeking comedy? I mean, I'm thinking, having seen you at the Edinburgh Fringe, the audience is going in expecting to laugh, and even though you are, having seen the show, you do lean into those moments of pathos very, very kind of beautifully and very kind of in a straightforward manner. Do you think the fact that the tragedy brings out parody in you as a company more is maybe to do with the frisson that you get from that kind of inverting tragedy within a comic context?
Probably. Tom?
I think you're right. Yes, there is probably now, and there wasn't when we started, but there is more now, a kind of almost a trained improv audience, people who kind of know what they're there for. They're there often to have a good time. They've seen other shows like it, and our marketing and everything else sort of plays up the fact that it is a good time, and it is most of the time. So yeah, I think there's definitely that. There's also a very human impulse to go with a laugh if you hear one, rather than maybe to hang on and say, this audience will have a bigger payoff with dramatic catharsis in 30 minutes. I don't know, it's tough sometimes to make that. What often happens, rather maybe than a tragic end or a tragic arc, is exactly, there's those heart-stopping moments that always reference kind of Kill Claudio in Much Ado About Nothing. Massive stuff has happened. Two people declare their love for each other. One person says, "Great, you love me? Kill your best friend." And the audience go, "Ooh," and that's often the depth that it sometimes sounds, rather than maybe ending very bleakly, which is a tough thing given the people that we're playing to.
You're alluding there to this kind of ecosystem of improv performance that has really kind of, you're right, going to the Fringe, it's now a kind of a really established form. And I think it's a you could imagine, I certainly think I've done this myself, maybe not consciously, but having a day where you block out, right, I'm going to have a day of improv, I'm going to have a day of stand-up, I'm going to have a day of sketch comedy. So I know that both of you are involved in other forms of improvisation as well. So I wanted to ask how you think the work that you do in Impromptu Shakespeare differs from the other forms of improv that revolve around kind of other well-known writers and genres.
Well, yes. So I'm involved with a few different shows. One's an improvised Dickens show called Steamed, the improvised Dickens novel, and Tom, more than me, but I'm also have been in the Adventures of the Improvised Sherlock Holmes, and so and I'm also in the Maydays, do a Happily Never After, which is kind of like a dark gothic fairy tale inspired by kind of the early works of Tim Burton, Henry Selick and stuff like that. So and they've all got their own sort of they've all got their own distinct feel. I think Impromptu is the most different one. It's the for me anyway, perhaps Tom will disagree, but is the outlier because it's so much further away from how we currently speak and potentially think and dress and yes, so they say the past is a foreign place. That's probably horribly misquoting somebody, and so the further past you get, the more foreign it is, and the more things that we've got to think about in terms of nailing it, in terms of getting it right and ticking enough of the boxes that we feel like we're honouring the original works of Shakespeare as well as putting on a good show.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that I think quite a lot of genre shows start resembling modern improv more than they do the genres that they represent, almost because of this kind of tidal pull of audience expectations. And it is nice that there is that a bit more of an anchor in the case of Shakespeare, maybe, in that it's driving you to kind of bigger wants and bolder choices than maybe, something that's maybe a little bit more refined. It's a Regency drawing room or something like that. So I think there's a difference there.
It's interesting what you're saying. What you're both saying in terms of like this honouring kind of impulse. I mean, I don't think it's an impulse. Again, you are, I guess, affected deeply by what your audiences want. And it's interesting that you're talking about the kind of the need or the wish to honour Shakespeare, and parody happens, but it's not your intention. And do you think that, I mean, maybe I'd just be interested to kind of that difference, that relationship between homage and parody that exists within your shows. Like, is that a kind of a symbiotic relationship, or do those two things kind of clash with each other?
I think they probably do clash in a way. I think the show works best when it's coming out of a place of love for the original material, and I think maybe on the more parodic side of things, it's dropping a line here and there to show that you know what's going on and you could do something more. But it feels sometimes like you're cheating a little bit. Whereas if you're you're doing something that maybe is for the fans that they spot that's in there, or you're as Rebecca says, you're working at a deeper level about the structure and the art that's going on and the wants that are so alien from our own. Then you're getting something that's a lot more satisfying at the end, including for the crowd, by the way, because we've said, they're there for a laugh. They have gone to a show with Shakespeare in the title, and there's a solid minority within the crowd that will be a little bit disappointed if there's not something there that's a cousin to the sort of shows that they otherwise go to see.
I would say within the cast, I don't mean as in like individual by individual, but like within any cast of the show, we feel a sort of there's almost like a balancing or self-regulation effect, that if someone goes and does some sort of scene where either they accidentally on purpose drop some anachronism, comedically, or they use some language that feels like it, that is definitely in parody or whatever, rather than in homage, then you might find that the next scene someone comes out and just bashes out some amazing, beautiful soliloquy that talks about, I don't know, the humours of the body, or the chain of being, or that sort of feels like it tips the balance the other way. I think there's definitely that effect within any cast of the show that might be put together. Sometimes we sort of feel like we've got to have an eye on it as a team. I would say.
I think that team. Sorry.
No, go for it.
No, I think that team dynamic is really interesting because, just as you would have had in Shakespeare's day, there were, aspirant writers and there were clowns, and you have something deep and meaningful, and then someone comes in and the audience
exactly
at them, and they're just they're riffing, and then you move on. It's the same with the different backgrounds that people in Impromptu bring to the shows, and as Rebecca says, the way that people kind of slot into those roles if different personalities are missing.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. That you've got people that are. Would you say you kind of you get actors who are more inclined to occasionally drop kind of pop culture references or modern anachronisms, and then there are actors who will, as you say, Rebecca, kind of pull it back into a place. I guess a place of more kind of direct homage. And is it quite important that you have that mix in your company?
I think all of us can do all of those things. Like, I know I myself, just I can only really speak for myself, that I've been guilty of the most heinous. I just can't resist dropping, like, quoting Lady Gaga lyrics or something in a show, or like making some big old joke about, because we're performing in Stroud in the nearest town, like taking the mick out of some local town. But then that does feel like it might work within Shakespeare, but you know what I mean? So it's doing stuff that feels like it's kind of really pushing at the edges. And then I'll also be the person in another show who goes, oh my goodness, like that was a really a scene, just happened that felt like it we need to really get our Shakespeare on in the next thing. And then I'll try and come on with some with something that's really poetic, or come in and be really strict about my iambic pentameter, or whatever it is. So I know that I can certainly do both, and I think everyone in the company can. And I think we vary it up a little bit as well, depending on our audience.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
So yes, sometimes you'll get, it depends which fringe venue you're in, even, like you'll get slightly different crowds. Whereas, we might do a Shakespeare festival, and that will bring in more people who generally have a deeper background knowledge perhaps of Shakespeare, or we might do sort of rural touring, and they're maybe looking for even something slightly different again. And we're not always changing, deliberately going, let's go into this show, from the off, or like, let's keep it like this, or let's do that. It's just, again, it's about this kind of, it's very difficult to ignore the audience as an improviser. It's almost like they are part of the performance in such a sort of integral way, because it is instant theatre and it's happening in the moment, and just sharing the same oxygen in the same room means that they have an effect on it, basically. Tom, have you got any more thoughts on that?
No, but again, just to stretch a comparison, I mean, that tonal breadth again just exists in the source material, right? I mean, the show forms a different shape if you're indoors lit by candles with someone rich sat on the stage with you, as again, you're in an outdoor place, there's thousands of you, and there's bear stuff going on next door. So exactly. Any show, including written ones, will mold themselves to where they're placed, and an improvised show more than most.
playing for gods and the groundlings, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I'm going to throw a curveball question out there, which is like, what's the most out there, just an example of a really out there improvised play that you've performed?
What, as impromptu, you mean?
Yeah.
I can think of, it wasn't out there in terms of, I mean, it depends what you mean by out there. I know we did some rural touring a few years back, and we went to, so it was after the Novichok incident, we went to a small village very near to Salisbury, which is where that happened. So just for anyone, there was a kind of international diplomatic incident where there was a nerve agent poisoning on the door handle of someone who, had previous work for a foreign state, and other people had been poisoned by it, and it was a big hoo-ha. Anyway, so we went to this village, and it was within a year of it happening, I think, or just over a year. And we asked so at the beginning of our show, the audience throw ping pong balls with like tropes and sort of Shakespearean ingredients, really. So locations, characters, things that might happen, props, all that kind of thing, into we do a sort of silly Tudor song and dance number. Well, they chuck these balls into the breeches, which are held open, of one of the people on stage, and then we pick balls out of that, and that's how we kind of get the subject matter for the show. Is, I suppose, to prove that we're improvising, but also to let the audience feel like they're having an engagement. And what we used to do when we did rural touring was then ask them follow-up questions. So we got, I think it was murder was one of the balls that came out. And we said, okay, so if you're going to murder someone, how would you murder them? And they said, we would poison them by painting poison onto a door knocker. And all of us on stage went really quiet, and we were like, okay. Are you really sure you want them, like, there weren't any other hands going up? We were like, are you really sure you really want to see this? Bearing in mind, this has been really traumatic for the area. The whole town had lost lots and lots of money, and businesses have been shut and stuff because of this. And the cleanup operation was really, really extraordinary. And so they really wanted to see it. And with their consent, we then did this show. It wasn't retelling that story. It was different kinds of characters, and there was different motivation for the killing and all the rest of it. But it did have somebody being poisoned by a door knocker, and they absolutely loved it. And then afterwards, just chatting to some of them, they were like, "Thank you so much. That we really needed this."
Wow.
So I suppose that's, in a way, quite out there. That's Definitely an example. Tom, have you got any sort of examples?
That's way better. I mean, the things that come to mind are ones where it kind of goes off the rails slightly, and you're very ananachronistic in that kind of stuff.
I'd be interested to hear like one of those, just in terms of kind of.
I remember one, Tom, where you got dressed up as an ant. Someone made you into an animal. But like it was in a fringe, and like the ones where we get like, the ones where we get talking animals, it's always which are very few and far between, but those feel a bit like we're going to definitely get notes about this after the show. Yeah,
you get two free passes, right? There's the kind of, it's a bit like some late plays, there's a statue comes to life,
yeah,
it's a god. Or they were also like filtering kind of the performance history of Shakespeare. So this is just this is some Berlin Directors Theatre job with, and they're all animals.
Oh, right, like King Lear with sheep, or that kind of thing. Like that did happen. Yeah. That's real.
Real?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that happened.
Sounds great.
What animal did you play, Tom? Or is there too many to list?
I think you were a horse, or a donkey. But I mean, that actually in itself isn't un-Shakespearean, but it wasn't just your head, it was the whole of you.
Okay. So, first year drama students, if you're being made to turn into animals or there's scope to use that.
Definitely. You make me think there, because you talked about the late plays and a god coming down. Is there anything as out there, to use my own term, out there as Saturn descending in Cymbeline? I mean, like, with no kind of preamble, really. That's
Yeah. Oh, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say we've definitely had similar, like Deus Ex Machina, like the God coming in at the end, kind of things happen, or somebody come back to life when we thought they were dead, or I don't know if we've had a statue. I don't know if we've had a statue coming to life, but we've had similar kind of things happen for sure, definitely.
And sorry.
I've always just remembered that it's not Saturn that descends in Cymbeline. It's Jupiter. Yeah. Just wanted to correct myself. It's Jupiter.
We're among friends. I can't remember much of that. I think I probably misquoted that. But I think it's interesting. There's a kind of there's a writer's handbook sense that some of those endings are a cheat. You know, you've given them nothing, and then here's a thing out of left field to solve it all up. But actually, I think you can somehow, because you've got access to the kind of emotional tone of the room, you can kind of emotionally earn that. And sometimes when somebody's, that character that you will later bring back to life, not that you know that yet, dies, and the audience goes, oh, and you can feel the slight deflation there. You can still be kind of honouring expectations and doing something that feels satisfying to people, even though if you were then to plot it out like a kind of Robert McKee screenwriting diagram, it would feel like a cheat. So
I can think of one. I can think of an example.
Yeah.
We did the very last show that we did before the pandemic was in Nottingham. And I'm going to get the theatre name wrong, but it was in the sort of studio space of the big sort of fancy theatre in the middle of Nottingham, and they have a glass elevator that goes up from the foyer up to the space where we were in, and we literally came into space and we were like, can we use this glass lift? And they said, yeah, I guess so. Wow. And at one point somebody got killed, and so their character was kind of off, and they came back as a god, as Dionysus, and they came up via the lift, which then obviously was glowing, and they came up and it's like they'd had this transformation into this god and then came out and sort of laid down the law about what was going to happen.
Wow.
So there we go. That was pretty out there, but definitely felt like in keeping, but also that character felt really unfair when they died. So in a way, the fact that they had been in a kind of incarnation of Dionysus was quite nice. Yeah.
Are there play structures for your audience's benefit where you feel you come back to them again and again? I know that because you're talking about kind of throwing the balls out into the audience, Rebecca. I'm just mentioning Cymbeline, for instance, and some of the late romances. Do you find that you do come back to the more well-known, more frequently performed templates for within Shakespeare, like Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet and Midsummer Night's Dream?
I wouldn't have said. I would say it's more genre that we come back to than a template.
Okay.
So yes, there'll often be that feeling of I would say romance is quite a good one, because something that ultimately is likely to have a semi-happy ending, but along the way people can get killed off. I would say would probably be our most classic. Yes, what we end up with at the end, if we had to pin it within one of the sort of genres of Shakespeare, but we don't have any structures that we work with, so that it's all these sort of narratives are improvised completely as we're going along. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. And in fact, some of the devices that we use, that we find ourselves falling back on, aren't because we've said, but mistaken identity, doubling and multiple, personas and that kind of stuff happens sometimes just because people made a mistake about who they thought they were talking to, and then you've got to work out why that happened, which is fun. People enjoy.
I want to look now again at kind of the application of what you do, and I know that you've been running workshops throughout lockdown, and obviously you ran workshops before that. What do you find that to be the best methods of best teaching methods of kind of instructing and initiating performers to improvise Shakespeare? And I think especially for our viewers, iambic pentameter, which I think is kind of seen as in this kind of this genre of Shakespearean improvisation, because as you pointed out right at the start of our conversation, you are not the only ones that do this. That kind of feels like the holy grail. The audiences come along and they witness a company, improvising in iambic pentameter and other kind of Shakespearean verse forms. So yeah, what are your kind of key teaching methods?
I would say that I've got two sort of things I try and keep in mind when I'm teaching an impromptu teach workshops, and there's a jam that we've been doing during lockdown, and courses as well. So when I myself am teaching improvising Shakespeare, I think it's really important to go back to the source, so to you take examples from the actual works without getting bogged down in them, but just quick references here and there, but making sure you do go back to that, so it feels like you're doing something that is I don't know, it kind of gives it a veracity somehow, if that's a word, feels like you're doing something for real, not just from your imagined sense of Shakespeare. And then the second thing that I like to kind of really try and remind myself is to make it fun, basically, especially when you're teaching, rather than getting people to perform. But even so, it's about coming up with playful, even if it's just doing scenes, playful sort of setups for those scenes, or if it's exercising muscles, then coming up with games that can exercise those muscles. That means it feels like it's fun, not work. If that makes sense. But then also just to add into what you said at the end in terms of iambic pentameter, so we definitely work our iambic pentameter muscles in rehearsal. However, I think as a company we don't count syllables on stage, so hopefully by working those muscles, it's muscle memory, and it should feel like it sounds like Shakespeare. It's got that lilt, but we took the artistic decision to not restrict ourselves, but we wanted our minds to be on the character work and the poetic nature of the language in terms of the actual words, rather than giving ourselves a constraint that we felt for us as a company would mean that we would be doing a different thing, and something that wasn't maybe our strong suit as a collective, that we have other strengths that we wanted to highlight more. So if you watch a show, it will hopefully feel like it's iambic pentameter for sure, but if you sat there and counted syllables, you'd be like, hey. Not that all of Shakespeare's in iambic pentameter anyway, of course, but
and if you're doing your job as actors and immersing your audience in the world that you've created, then they're not going to be counting everything.
Well, I feel a bit sorry for anyone that sat there actually watching our show but counting syllables, quite honestly. I would hope that they would watch the show. But Tom, have you got thoughts on this? I'm sure you have.
I mean, if they're syllable counters, they'd have a rough time at Hamlet or something. To be honest, that is a
exactly.
question. And I think as the plays go on and the sort of the sense kind of form more strangely across all of that structure, even the stuff that is in verse, which isn't all of the plays, is harder to sort of recognise as such, and it's much more in the rhythm of thought rather than like a Philip Marlowe play, which is a bit more like a sort of schoolyard exercise. As Rebecca says, you learn the scales and then you do jazz. Although I think starting with them is sometimes quite helpful, just to get that kind of heartbeat down and to kind of demystify it a bit and show that it's not just that it's possible, but actually it's helpful because it takes your mind off worrying about where the next sort of 40 minutes of your play will be. And I think, yeah, when Rebecca mentioned fun, I think that was really important. Like, I think, I don't know, it's something like reminding people that they're improvising kind of around the plays rather than trying to kind of to entirely recreate them. And then the kind of license that gives people. You're kind of, it's like the difference between stage fighting and jiu-jitsu or something like that. Like it's you're creating an effect rather than paying attention to the actual inner workings of the thing.
So I think I mentioned lockdown and the fact that you've been running workshops and jams, which I can attest, having attended a couple of the jams, are brilliant and really, really, really fun and kind of really get your brain working. And the fact that you've used objects, for instance, as a means to kind of make it feel quite personal and relatable as this kind of hook into starting to learn how to improvise Shakespeare, I think is really helpful. So speaking to that more widely, I just wanted to ask how you have coped as a company during the pandemic, and more specifically, whether you think improvisation works kind of online and with social distancing.
Tom, do you want to go first on this one?
I do. Well, I'm going to be. So I think impromptu. I've been less involved with impromptu during lockdown. So I've not been involved in those workshops and jams and things like that. I've watched with awe and admiration how they've kept the company together, done interesting things, thought about how it would work, all the rest of that. I think all improvisers would probably say that we're not there yet in recreating a stage experience online. You have to do something radically different. And it feels like there's lots of experiments going on, but even now, after more than a year, it's still kind of early days. So I think we can never have what it feels like on stage online, which is not to say it shouldn't be done, but it means it has to be sort of reinvented. And I think Impromptu have been a company doing really interesting things with that. But yeah, it does feel different. And the slight kind of the difference of etiquette in how you interact with one another on the screen is a bit of a limitation. But Impromptu have done really fantastic stuff. And I think it's unlike some other companies that I've interact with a little bit. I think they're actually going to come back into the world. I think the next show is at the end of July, in really good shape and doing interesting things.
Yeah, it's much about kind of, I guess, retaining your followers and your audience. And yeah, that seems to, maybe Rebecca can speak about this, but that seems to be something that through those various initiatives that you've done that, and maybe as you're saying, kind of alluding to there, Tom, have expanded your reach.
I think, yeah, I think more people know about us now, or a wider range of people know about us now since the pandemic, because of launching some online teaching, and also through some of the other stuff that people in the company have been doing online, and then people look at what they're doing and they're like, oh, they also do this Impromptu Shakespeare thing, that's interesting, and then they go and look at that. I think our reach has changed and been different. I am really happy to say that I think that Impromptu Shakespeare are gonna come back, or are back. There's no, there isn't a question of whether they're going to come back or not, whereas with so many other performance companies that I'm aware of, and some that I'm in myself, like they've been really sort of a really difficult time, not just because we're not performing, but because we're not meeting up. And Impromptu have been regularly rehearsing online, and doing things and getting training from outside, and also sort of like, thinking about how we present ourselves, and looking forward to recruitment and doing some diversity training for that and that sort of thing. So like, there's definitely been sort of, if it hasn't felt like an entirely passive or time. So that's great that those who've been organising things in the company have made those things happen. And I would say that I'm just excited about the idea of getting back together again. I think it's a real mixed bag for some people. I really enjoy teaching online. I think it has some benefits over teaching in real life, and certainly from a kind of accessibility point of view, both in terms of where I live, but also for not everybody can come to our in-person classes, or so that's great actually. In terms of performing online, I think there is so much scope, but it needs to be thought of as its own medium, and we need to play with the strengths of the medium and not think about it in terms of of what we're used to in a real life situation. So looking more to kind of like what people have been doing with video games and VR and that kind of thing, you know, looking more at that angle of things rather than thinking about how do we translate our thing that's normally on this fringe, in a fringe show, onto set. And to be fair, they may never see the light of an audience, but we have a couple of people have pioneered things within Impromptu's rehearsals that have been kind of could be performed, one involving sock puppets and the other a kind of Jacobean drama sort of type thing, like so I'm amping up the kind of violence and using the camera to sort of shock and horror effect, and sort of all sex and violence type thing. And those may just have been things that stay in the rehearsal room. Who knows where they'll go going forward as projects, but they at least were really interesting and kept it fresh and kept our brains keen for more and kept us getting together.
Well, I think it's that. I think having done a bit of quite a bit of Shakespearean performance online myself, and kind of attended your workshops and watched a lot of the show must go online. I think you say the word fresh there, Rebecca. I think improvisation, if post pandemic there is an extent to which elements of online performance continue and flourish, and are kind of offered as alternatives, with kind of access restricted in terms of continued lockdown restrictions internationally. Who knows? I think that improv and the sense of spontaneity, which is such a kind of a real difficulty with anything online, the sense of kind of not being aware of the little box that you're within on the screen, and kind of coming out of the moment and realizing that you're staring at a computer screen and not physically with those people. As a performer, I've always found that the process of improvisation is really the kind of the major nugget of inspiration to get out of that feeling. And you see that, I think, in companies that have come out of lockdown Shakespeare that don't market themselves as improvisers of Shakespeare, like the show must go online kind of community, but they're certainly the kind of the sort of DIY things they do in their performances, and the sense of kind of anything could happen at any moment. That I've seen you do in the jams as well. I think that's really important, and I think is something that lots of theatre companies of all kind of profiles could really learn a lot from. So finally, for a bit lit, I want to ask you both what the word literature means to you. Who wants to go first?
I don't mind.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this a little bit, and I was like, a little bit. Hey. And then I thought, wow. So to me, if you say the word literature, it means two really different things, but I think it's kind of pertinent. So it means both, for me, the written word, but in the sense of this often used as sort of like quite grand establishment kind of works of great merit. Literature, right? That Shakespeare would sort of, being a playwright, but that he would fit within. But then it also means literature, like, oh, have you got any literature? Meaning, like, have you got a leaflet, or or a little pamphlet or something, like the most like literal form of the written word about something. And so because it's kind of like in my brain lodged as this kind of like high and low, and because improv is like this kind of outsider art form, I mean, I've not been trained as an actor or anything like that. I came into this in my 20s, and I've done loads of training as an improviser, but it definitely feels like outside of theatre, and as a result, it's, you know, it feels in a way that's quite relevant, really, then, that literature in my brain is lodged very much as both like the high and also the low. Maybe like somehow with an Impromptu Shakespeare I managed to combine those two things, the most accessible and the most lofty in one thing. Tom?
Well, I think Rebecca's done a great job of finding improv's place in that, because I struggle with, you know, I probably, you know, inherited this idea of it being kind of the best thoughts in writing kind of thing, and then I think obviously, you know, we've moved on to a kind of an oral literature, and we've thought about that word best, you know, best for the moment, best in response to something else, and so on. So yeah, where is improv space? I kind of imagine it, you know, literature as being a sort of, you know, the kind of classic campfire conversation, and, you know, some people are, you know, holding forth to the assembled company, and some people are thinking great thoughts about what's being said, and then there's always going to be an outer ring of people kind of gossiping a bit and telling the silly jokes and all that kind of stuff. And I think that has real value, and I think that tells you much more about a moment maybe than some of the more serious stuff. And the kind of talk still counts. And, you know, it's strange to talk about great conversation as literature. That feels like it's a different category totally. But like, think back to an 18th century salon, and a great talker is maybe valued more than a writer would be. We just only have written records of it, and it gets absorbed back into the written word. So yeah, there should be a place for kind of oral snark and chat and stuff you make up on the spot. And brilliant. And improv is there somewhere, but it's a little bit removed from the best thoughts in words, but the best meaning lots of things.
Here's to snark.
Snark.
I mean, the quip is the kind of, you know, the centerpiece of so many franchises now, really, you know. So I think that's, you know, of things like Star Wars and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the quipster is king, you know. So no, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Rebecca and Tom, and I will see you both soon.
Can we just let people know how to find us?
Please,
is that right?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
We've been asked to get in a little social media plug. So
sorry.
If you want to find Impromptu Shakespeare, basically Google Impromptu Shakespeare, and you'll find our website, which is impromptushakespeare.com. But we've also got at Impromptu Shakes, and on most of the social media platforms that you might choose to peruse, at Impromptu Shakes is where you'll find us.
I'll make sure you
Ronan.
can find all the details below in the description. Okay. Thanks very much, both of you. See you soon.
Oh, thank you.
Bye.